the topic of today, which we will talk a bit more about content and about, a topic that we actually hear a lot. There's a lot of customers who have questions around how you can work with vault speed in, large enterprise teams, in distributed teams, where you have different domains that all need to be, serviced with the right data product, with the right setup for their integration layer. They all need to be or have access to the right data. They all have their own source systems that they want to integrate into a central data vault layer. So how do you do that? And what's the best setup? So I'm going to show you guys a presentation that I already did a few times on events that we visited in September and October. And it's actually based on a guidance document that Dirk already shared with us internally. And that we're also, elaborating on to build you a version that we can also send you later on as a document that you can read and work with. This is still the slideware version, so please bear with me. And I'm happy to get your feedback and questions once we get through this content. And yes, for those who don't know it yet, Dirk is our CTO and co-founder indeed. He's our product leader. So it's his vision that I'm sharing here with you guys. Now, I had the privilege of joining Dirk to the Gartner Summit earlier this year. And there they presented us, among many other things, but they presented us their hype cycle, of course, a hype cycle around data management, in which they already in 2023 made some statements around data mesh. Data mesh is typically an architecture that is used a lot if you want to do distributed development in the data management sphere. And they said in 2023 that it will become obsolete before the plateau. Some people call it that before plateau. It's not the same as that, but by obsolete, I mean, that's not the best way forward, let's say, for data mesh. And they had several reasons to make this statement. With data mesh, you have sometimes problems to define the boundaries between different domains. It can introduce a lot of technical complexity. You need highly skilled teams and training. The interoperability between different domains and the different data products that you build for them can also cause difficulties. It often requires a cultural change if you're not used to this distributed way of working. What about the data quality management? Also a lot of problems there. What happens when you have several teams all applying different quality rules? Then how do you manage data quality across the organization? And the same thing for compliance. If you have certain rules, regulatory reasons that you should comply to, I would say GDPR for privacy. If you work in the financial industry, there's also a dozen of regulatory systems that you have to comply with. So how do you also manage that in a data mesh? Hasn't proven to be easy. And in 2024, and this was an update from recent, and I took this screenshot of my phone. I was reading this while I was traveling, but in 2024, the data mesh is even off the hype cycle. They just threw it up there. And the reason was that it became subsumed into the data fabric. By that, I mean that, the good things of data mesh obviously don't go away. There's a lot of things that are very positive and that a lot of people want to continue work with in terms of this distributed development approach. But the good things, they continue to live into Gartner's data fabric approach, and the bad things they wanna fix with data fabric. So of course it's Gartner who says this, and you have to take everything they say also with a grain of salt. But we wanted to understand this better, and that's why we dug deeper into the topic and why we built this vision around it. One of the top things that are still top of mind in a lot of organizations are the data products. They were also mentioned, by the way, in the hype cycle. Gartner says that they haven't fully matured yet. I don't really know. I think it's already something you hear a lot in a lot of organizations. People talk around data products, and that is what they want to deliver to their business users. So an important concept, and also a concept that was very important in data mesh, this productizing of data was a very important topic there. That's actually what this slide also says. You had these 4 pillars of data mesh. Product thinking was one of them. The fact that everything should be self-service. You build infrastructure as a platform. We will come back to that later. Why? Because infrastructure is a term that we often use, but what do we mean by it? And that's something I will come back to in a few slides. Domain driven, so a distributed architecture, very important. And then of course the governance, which was also very important. But the few things that I wanna dive a bit deeper on in the rest of the presentation is indeed the productizing of data, but also the infrastructure. Data mesh, if you look at it, and it's one of the first chapters in the book as well, is where they explain that it's actually based on the microservice architecture. In microservices, something that is not necessarily related to data, you kind of combine all the functions that you need to be covered in your organization, and every single function is covered by its own microservice. So it's a way to move away from the big monoliths and the application giants that try to cover everything. No, instead you build microservices that each service their own needs, their own use within the organization, and they are loosely coupled together, which makes them easier to build, easier to maintain, easier to test, and they can be owned by a small team. So it's a way also distributing the setup of certain applications within an organization. Now, data mesh tried to apply this philosophy into building data products, but it doesn't always work that well. And why? Well, we believe it's because it's very hard to build an integrated data system if you use a fully distributed approach. That's not an easy thing to do. And there is, it's in some way also a contradiction. How can you integrate data that multiple stakeholders within the organizations need if you don't talk to each other about them? Doesn't really make sense. And also, and that's the second problem, let's say that indeed we do this in a fully distributed fashion, then if everybody would build their own integrations for the use cases where they need to integrate, let's say, source 1 with source 2, and some other department needs the same kind of integration, instead only they also need source 3 to be added. You do a lot of work, a lot of double work, a lot of effort that is being wasted on work that another team has already done before. So you don't use the economies of scale, the economies of scope that you can have when you have a more centralized development of a data integration layer. So those are just a few thoughts on why this microservice architecture was not really working for data, or at least not always. Let's put it like that. Now, Gartner wanted to put forward their data fabric. Now, what is a data fabric? It's Gartner's approach to data integration and data management. I'm not going to explain it in full detail. If you want to read a bit more about it, please reach out. And also in the white paper that we're building, we're gonna elaborate a bit deeper on data fabric. But in a way, there are three things that are really important. It's metadata and the activation of metadata. It's also AI and knowledge graphs and automation. Those things are critical to building a data fabric. And then again, here in the definition, again, there is talk about this data infrastructure, a unified and flexible data infrastructure. And what I always like about these concepts and about these approaches is that they give us a lot of food for thought and how can we set up our data landscape. But when it needs to go more technical, they never go that far. They never go that deep into the details. Another cool slide, and this is just a picture that I think it was either me or Dirk, but we took it with our phones. That's why it's a bit tilted. I'm sorry for that. I tried to look it up in our subscription portal, but I did my best and I could not find the real slides. But anyway, this approach was something that we kind of liked because it also kind of adheres to the way we've been approaching data management with Voltspeed in the years that we have Voltspeed as a separate product company, but also in the years before, where Voltspeed was still a consulting company that did a lot of data projects. For those of you who don't know it, for Voltspeed actually originates from a consultancy firm that did a lot of data automation and data vault automation that started in 10 somewhere. So that's where that background came from, and where also our own reference architecture was developed. And based on that reference architecture, we developed Voltspeed. Now, this thing for us came pretty close to that. You adopt automation, you adopt metadata activation to build your infrastructure. Again, what do we mean with the word infrastructure? Come back to that later. But then you use data mesh with its distributed approach, with its productized approach, to deliver all these different data products for all the different domain teams that's required. Interesting and great, but still, and how do you do this? How do you build this? Quick time check. Okay, we're good. And this is actually the architecture that Dirk, our CTO, came up with, and that we've been working with in the past 10, 15 years, let's say. And the idea is there that we make this purple layer here, which we call the foundation layer, we make it part of the infrastructure. So a foundation layer where you have your data integrated and centralized in a layer that every single data product domain team within the entire organization can use. You build that layer, and that is what can actually solve a lot of the problems that we've seen with data mesh. So a foundation layer that acts as kind of a service that becomes part of the infrastructure, that makes infrastructure really valuable. Because let's be honest, if I ask what the word infrastructure means to 100 people, then 90 of them will say, well, it's the data platform, it's the cloud platform, it's the storage, all these technical items, right? But what if we add the actual integration layer with integrated data already to the definition of an infrastructure layer? And that's the vision that we would like to see, and that we have seen working with a lot of our customers and in a lot of our projects. So, okay, a shared foundation layer that becomes part of the infrastructure. And then different domains, different domain teams that can deliver data products based on that shared foundation layer. So the people who work in these domain teams who work on that gold layer, if you use the medallion architecture, they can do whatever they want. They can build whatever they want, but at least they build it using the same raw materials that they can get in that foundation layer. It doesn't mean that the foundation layer is the only source for the data product. They can have some sources on the side, or sources that are very specific to their own domain, let's say, that are not shared with the organization, but still this foundation layer can be an important, or the most important source for any data product that they deliver. Another thing that you can do in that gold layer is build a shared library of repeatable logic. A library that is shared not only within a domain team, but across a domain team. Let's assume that I have a definition for profit within my organization, and I build an automation template that can implement that into a fact table or a dimension table or anything else. And you build that definition, you templated it, and the domain team of the CFO has implemented that for their finance domain. 3 months later, I have the marketing domain that also wants to implement the definition of profit. What they could do is they could look for a template that implements profit fact, for example, in that shared template library. They don't have to use or reuse the exact same definition, but from the template, they can adapt it to their own reality, to their own version of the truth. So if you have that shared library available, yeah, you can speed up things even more. That's the idea. So those 3 concepts are really important also to understand this image. And then this is another way to represent it. You have 3 planes here. The infrastructure utility plane, of which your foundation layer, your data vault layer, and I saw it in the chat, so sounds like DV, indeed correct. You build up that foundation layer with data vault methodology, of course, it's the integration layer. On top there, you have your data product experience plane. And this is where your domain teams build and manage the product, the data product lifecycle. So they build them, they change them, they do the maintenance, the deployment, and also if a data product becomes useless, the decommissioning. And then finally, you have the mesh experience plane. And this is then, like a marketplace for data products where every stakeholder within the organization can find the right answers, the right data. And then finally, two approaches that we have seen work, because we got a lot of questions also on the topic of, okay, how do I organize my teams around these concepts? We see that there are two setups that you could use, and I'll show them on the screen already together. The first one here is the distributed approach on the right-hand side of the slide, where you say, okay, I work on a feature by feature basis. So I organize my teams around features, and the setup of the foundation layer, the setup of the different sources, the setup of the presentation layer is something that a domain team would organize. And then you have a central foundation team that kind of helps with the alignment. And this is a setup that you also saw in many data mesh projects that use Data Vault. They always had this central governance team that took care of the modeling of the Data Vault in its entirety. We would always recommend to have one Data Vault for as long as the domains use each other's data, let's say. If you have two domains that don't have anything to do with each other, that are practically separate companies, let's say, then you could say, okay, I build a data vault for every domain separately. But if they interact with each other, it makes sense to make use of those economies of scale, economies of scope, and make them use that central data vault layer. They build it together. And then the foundation team, for example, could consist of like a couple of data vault experts that also work in these several domain teams. They come together on a regular basis, highly regular basis, I would recommend, and they align on how they are going to model the data vault in its entirety. Another setup is the multi-speed approach, something that also works pretty well, where you have a separate team for the foundation layer. They build the foundation layer using automation. And by the fact that they use automation, they can reach the speed that is needed to keep up with all the requests that come in from the different domain teams. So those are two different ways in which you could set up your teams. I've seen both of them work, but I think it depends a bit of the situation, which one would work best, just to give you an idea. And then, how do we translate this into our products? Of course, you all know already the library, the template library that we have available for Data Vault automation, and the product that we have available for Data Vault automation. So that's what you would use to build that central foundation layer with Data Vault methodology and automation, of course. And then to build that shared library of repeatable template logic, you can use our template studio, or soon also our template modeler, where you can build automation templates that can be shared across the organizations to implement downstream logic that is used then in the domain, different domains within your organization. So to recap, and we're not saying, just to make that also clear, this is not the only implementation that could work, right? But it's the implementation that we as Wolfspeak have seen working, and which we therefore recommend. That's something I want to make clear. But it's a hybrid approach. So you combine the advantages of both centralized and distributed approaches. You use the foundation layer as a service, and you already add real business value into your data infrastructure, real data, usable data, shared data, and of course, then your template library for the transformation patterns that you can use to accelerate the data product delivery within your different domain teams.